Hello everyone, I'm Beeman and this is Argossean city tutorial. In previous parts, I've laid foundations for the city. I've placed various landmarks and surrounded the area with walls. Now, it's time to start filling the blanks. The point of previous episodes was to create nuclei from which districts will grow. So now I don't have to worry about planning and can organically build around them, keeping to the theme of the landmark. In this part, I'm going to finish the docks and the area around the port's agora. The design process remains the same. Identify key features, then build around them, only this time in smaller scale. One thing that immediately comes to mind when thinking of docks are ships. There are none in game and my mod collection has only a few small vessels, so I had to improvise. Also, ships won't help me to develop the area in any way, so I've decided to build a shipyard instead. This will be a significant part of the military base. After all, a prosperous city would need both army to defend its walls and the navy to secure the trade routes. This place should feel rugged, tough, industrial, so I've opted to use stone brick as the luxurious Argossean tiles would look out of place here. I will also have to remodel the docks a little bit to accommodate the ships, but that's not an issue. After all, they were just a rough outline of the district's borders, just a sketch to be raised once it fulfilled its function and proper lines are drawn. Building a ship using Conan's limited tile set is surely possible, but I never liked the results, as they are at best a rough approximation, and it wouldn't fit here as a complete ship or even just a fully built hull waiting to be rigged might seem out of place in the dry dock. I'm going to employ a simple trick here. People tend to recognize shapes and patterns easily, their imagination filling all the blanks, which often leads to misidentification. Then, I'm going to exploit the fact that average viewer lacks expert knowledge required to correct that mistake. This is often a safe bet. In this case, I wager that most of you have no experience with shipbuilding. Basically, I'm trying to trick your brain into making an argument from ignorance that this is actually a ship. Sure, I could spend a day or two modeling a trireme in Blender and put it in game as mod, but that would be actually counterproductive. What I want to teach you here is how to stop thinking about what objects are meant to be, but rather treat them as universal building blocks. Identify key features of whatever you want to make, then use what's available to create an illusion of that object. Also, consider that making assets is expensive, and a great number and variety of them will lead straight into optimization hell, so reusing them is extremely important. In the Acropolis episode, I mentioned incorporating passage of time into the build process. This is another instance where it can be done. Unlike the Acropolis, where different styles of temples hinted at cities past, and incomplete, work-in-progress ships indicate that there's a future ahead of it. This is extremely important as my goal is to build a realistic city, and nothing is more artificial than freezing it in time. In some absurd state, where everything's done, everything's in its place, and no change can come. Instead, I'm trying to create a snapshot, capture a single moment from its long existence. A way to indicate change is to present some aspects of the city as work in progress, others as obsolete, and some clashing violently with surrounding elements as new styles and trends emerge. Once the ships are done, I still need to do one more very important step before moving on. They seem to defy gravity and don't mesh well with the surrounding area, so I'm going to blend the two together and resolve the stability issue at the same time, using logs to prop up the ships and build some scaffoldings around them to allow workers to actually reach them. This may seem trivial or unnecessary, especially the supports under the ship, but it all adds to the realism of the scene. Also, I always consider the perspective from which the objects will be seen, and in the case of Conan, building in admin mode with flying on really distorts how it's perceived. From human point of view, all the added support elements will be perfectly visible and significant part of the whole scene. One thing, I'm using pillar snap point extension from Glass Constructions and more to place pillars on foundation corners. Actually, most of the ship's elements are modded. Check out the description for my full mod list. Since the shipyard is actually a part of the military base, I could simply surround it with walls, but I won't. Building a city requires, among others, a delicate balance of unifying and diversifying factors, and this is an opportunity to employ both. So, for this side, I've decided to build a variation of stoa, a heavily fortified one, that will serve as a storage space for the raw materials. This architectural element is common throughout the city, so employing it here, albeit with significantly changed aesthetics, will help to maintain consistency, while at the same time all other aspects of the building, color, ruggedness and fortification, fits the theme of the area well. This is also the reason for the Yamatai roof. I'm using ceramic tiles on most of the buildings, and they serve as a powerful unifying factor, indicating the prevalent technology at the time, available to almost everyone. In this instance, I've opted to change the color to differentiate this zone from the rest of the city. Also, consider the whole shipyard in terms of color scheme. The stone, brick and wood are all similar, so the red tiles would blend with them a bit too much, in my opinion. But the blue Yamatai ones provide a much needed contrasting element with their cold tone. Side facing the street will be taken by a large yet simple building divided into two parts by a gate. I'm not going to do anything with the internal space now. Actually, I'm going to leave most of the buildings empty to preserve resources. But don't worry, I'll show you some select interior examples in later parts. Anyway, the building's design follows the same principle. Basically, it's another version of the Boleuterion's gateway with two simple wings added. So again, we have common architectural element executed in different materials. Consider for a moment a typical suburb. You will probably see a great variety of houses there, but the differences result from resources available to the owners and their needs. So you will probably see variety in size, decorative elements and colors, which make each house unique. What most people won't notice is that they'll have, for example, extremely similar, if not identical, roof pitch. What I'm trying to say is that there are common design elements, usually linked to geography, history and culture, that unify all the individual designs derived from them, while wealth is the main factor influencing distinctive, unique features of each building. Finally, on the remaining side I've constructed a simple wall. Its proximity to the cliff and city's outer walls creates a nice secluded alley outside, which opens some cool opportunities for decorating that I'll explore in future episodes. In order to maintain consistency between all three walls, and to avoid this huge area being dominated by brown color, I've added two simple awnings. Also, it would be nice to have some shade for the workers. Please do pay attention to the invisible element I'm placing on the floor. Again, this is pillar snap point extension from Glass Constructions and more, and that's how I'm placing the pillars on the foundation's corners. A somewhat similar effect can be also achieved using stairs, as they have pillar attach point on the top, but it's buggy and less versatile. It doesn't require mods though. With shipyard done, I extended the paved area to match the tip of the peninsula where Tholos is located, surrounded it with walls and rebuilt the docks on both sides, encircling the whole peninsula so that the south and north docks from part 1 are now connected. One issue I ran into was Monster Nest in the middle of the military base. I couldn't remove it, so I simply chose to build a monument to cover it. As for the buildings, I want to keep everything simple and neat, as I want this area to feel completely different from the rest of the city. The reason is that I want to replicate a system similar to many Greek polis, which did not have a standing army. rather all adult citizens became soldiers in time of need. So this would be more like a training camp for the Ephebeia, hence its rough living conditions and separation from the city. There were of course exceptions, but even in Sparta, the homoioi did not live their entire lives in the barracks, and upon reaching the age of 30 were able to finally return home. Although home may not be the best term to use here. This is another case of the phenomenon I've warned you against on few occasions. Our modern understanding of even common terms is not compatible with antiquity. Basically, in modern Western societies, we seek meaningful romantic relationships and commit to them. Love leads to creation of family and home. In classical Greece, these things often existed in isolation. Family and lawful children, being a matter of state and personal status, often left a longing for something more. This need was fulfilled in other ways. A homoerotic mentor-student relationships were common, one of the most famous involving Socrates and Alcibiades. Then there were hetere, the companions, a high-class prostitute, independent and educated woman, mistresses of wealthy and powerful, renowned for their beauty and charm, but also intellect and eloquence, like for example Aspasia, mistress of Pericles. As for the Spartans, they often found comfort and love in the embrace of their brothers in arms, which was not only accepted but even encouraged, as it was believed that they'd perform better on the battlefield out of fear of dishonoring themselves in front of the lover. Even though classical Greece is often regarded as one of the pillars of Western civilization, it was an alien, different world, and it is not our place to judge, as we should merely strive to understand it. Anyway, I'm getting off track here, so let's get back to building. I still have plenty of empty space between the landmarks I've built in the first episode and the docks that needs to be filled. I'm going to place some purely utilitarian buildings along the docks and fill the remaining space with homes. I'm following here the same principles as in the shipyard earlier. This building is another variation of stoa. So again, a common architectural element, different execution. There's also one more thing I need to consider here. All of these buildings have to perform their functions, which affects their design, but I also want them to provide a proper background for the monuments. Consider the temple, polis, and stoas around the agora. Their surroundings absolutely cannot obscure or overshadow them. Quite the opposite. Everything that's near should emphasize their greatness, and most importantly, provide a sense of scale. One way to achieve this is to simply make everything significantly lower, and at the same time obscure the ground level of the monuments. To achieve the correct balance between sizes of different buildings, I like to often look at the place from different distances and angles, paying special attention to how it looks from the human perspective. Flying is a great tool for building, but whenever you're stuck at designing, try to simply walk around the place and see how your ideas feel to the average passerby. I don't want to go into much detail about homes here, as it will be the focus of a separate episode, so I'll just give you the design basics. The common features include open-air courtyard around which rooms are arranged, andron, the most representative room where men would gather, and gynaikeon, a separate room for women, often placed on the second story of the building headed, otherwise it was located as far from the street as possible. The design reflected fundamental idea prevalent in Greek societies that men were superior to women, whose personal freedoms were severely restricted under the guise of decency. In theory, women shouldn't leave the house at all and stay at gynaikeon if male guests were present. In practice, this probably was the case only for the upper echelons of Athenian society, as they could afford servants and slaves to perform various household-related chores. As for the most of society, some degree of personal freedom was necessary for economical reasons and daily life of the household. The matter is complicated, as sources are limited. All texts we have are written by men. They don't really focus on those issues, usually only had a limited interest in lower classes of society, and should be taken with a healthy dose of skepticism. This is a history's great filter. The mundane, the ordinary, the bland, the simple everyday life of a nameless street is lost to us, because none of the people who walked it deemed it interesting enough to write about. Thankfully, bureaucracy is quite an old invention, but in case you're interested, I've got some bad news for you. Those texts aren't published in modern languages, because, well, inventory lists are not exactly a fascinating read, and publishing books is business like any other. But if you really want a taste of working with text, rather than reading for pleasure, you could start with something much easier, like Procopius of Caesarea on buildings, a valuable, though not exactly sincere, source for Byzantine architecture. Honestly, if you have interest in antiquity, learning the appropriate language is the best way to go, and believe me, there are few pleasures on this world comparable to the overwhelming joy of reading Xenophon for the first time, or untangling the intricate wordplay of Hellenistic poetry. Anyway, I decided to spare you the tedium of watching me decorate this part of the city. Instead, let's take a walk around the district and see the finished result. Agora, including surrounding stoas, is a prominent meeting place for the citizens. It's filled with merchants offering various goods, but it was also a place to listen to poets, rhetors and philosophers. Stoicism is actually named after Stoa Poikile, where its founder Zenon of Kition used to teach. I've turned the nearby house into Capeleion, a tavern. In terms of design, it's virtually identical to a regular house, which gave the scholars of antiquity quite a puzzle, as Capeleia were often mentioned in texts, but never found by the archaeologists, until someone noticed that certain houses had absurd amount of drinking cups. Some of them were quite fancy and humorous, like the Brigos cup, which depicts joyful partygoers on the outside, yet the bottom, visible only after drinking the wine, shows a man vomiting. I've decided to use the northern docks mostly for fishing. This makes sense to me as it was, and actually still is, a very dangerous occupation. Hence the proximity to the temple. Imagine fishermen passing it by as they walked their boats, asking for a blessing before setting off into the unknown, and then giving thanks and offerings upon their safe return, or fixing their nets and traps in the temple's shadow, dwarfed yet protected by the god's majesty. This also gives me an opportunity to introduce a major factor contributing to the city's realism: inequality. Hence the difference in clothing between citizens on the agora and the fishermen. To further emphasize this, I've created a scene that literally shows hierarchy of the society. There are 3 beggars below the altar upon which sacrifice is being offered by the priestess to secure God's favor for the soldiers standing on the agora. To add some variety and hint at temple's daily affairs, I've placed a different ship near it, unloading the sacrificial animals, while on the other side, there's a merchant selling some to anyone who might be going to the temple. The southern dock, on the other hand, is taken mostly by trade ships. Earlier I mentioned unifying factors, which maintain the consistency of a city. One of those is the technological advancement level, which affects to some degree all aspects of life. In case of port, it takes form of the standard package. Consider a modern port. Virtually all the goods are transported in standardized containers on standardized pallets. In Age of Sail Europe, you'd see barrels everywhere, while period I've chosen as my inspiration for this city relied on pottery. This is also a place to include some diversifying elements, different kinds of goods, but most importantly, people. So I've used different style of clothing for the sailors of the merchant ships. The main thing I wanted to achieve with the military base is contrast. For starters, the shipyard should be busy, bustling with activity, while the barracks clean and neat. Then, on a different level, both areas contrast with the rest of the city with their limited color palette and sparse decorations. In short, they are 2 different takes on a utilitarian area, one chaotic, the other ordered. The ships being built are completely different than the ones in the docks, which is desired effect, as warships and trade ships of the time shared little in terms of design. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you for watching. Cheers!